continue to thank you guys for the support, continuing to like the videos, share them, commenting. Everything helps the algorithm. To everybody that's donated within the past few months, thank you for that. There's links for that in the description. Like I said, it's non-mandatory at all. It does help the podcast. And I want to thank Jeneen Miller for being my Patreon member. I really appreciate you. You've been my Patreon member for several months now, so that really means the world to me. I do this by myself for people that don't know, so everything helps to incorporate back into the podcast. And with that being said, I want to do a moment of silence for the person still suffering with addiction, intrusive thoughts, anything like that. So on the count of 3, I'm going to do a moment of silence. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for that. And without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest for the day. Go ahead and introduce yourself and give us like a brief introduction of where you went.
All right. Well, my name is Michael Balaban. I'm 46. I was originally raised in Chicago, now live in Las Vegas. I was an attendee of the CEDU High School in Running Springs from November 15th of 1993 to November 15th of 1994. I was in Rudy Bent's and then later Russ Decker's family there. I did an 8-week stint in Ascent in 94 that also included 2 weeks in NIBH, also known as Northern Idaho Behavioral Health, or the place with the padded room if you got in trouble at Ascent. Well after my experience at CEDU, I ended up through a contact I made on the CEDU administrative staff working for 3 months at a school called, or troubled teen institution called Positive Impact out in Bahia de Quino, Mexico, down in 1999. And then I worked 5 months for Coronado Academy of Costa Rica out in 2002, doing work stateside here in the marketing and administrative fields. Other than that, after the troubled teen institution, I also did 2 tours in Afghanistan with the U.S. Army, from which I retired in 2015.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, my pleasure. Best job I ever had. And truth be told, CEDU bred me to be the most effective soldier I could be, but also to be very vulnerable and susceptible to further complex post-traumatic stress disorder and complications of military service. So it was a natural fit, and it was also something that furthered the traumatic headspace and mindset I've been dealing with ever since.
Understandable. Okay. Why don't you give us a little bit of background, like before the program, what led up to you going there? What was going on in your life? Maybe a little bit, a brief, anything you want to throw in there.
All right.
Maybe.
Well, one of the things that I've done a lot is a lot of research on CEDU and Synanon, and I've noticed that a lot of folks that have come in have had a lot of questions in their own head during their testimonials and a little bit of confusion about the connection between the Synanon cult and the CEDU school, as well as the connection between those two and the troubled teen industry at large. A lot of people have pointed back at CEDU as the original school, the OG troubled teen institution, along with the Elan school out on the East Coast. And the truth is they were both born of the Synanon cult. One was by Christina Ricci's father over at Elan, and over on our West Coast, we had Mel Wasserman, who was a member of the Synanon cult. He was never a drug user. And he was always a member. He was a member of early Synanon, back when Chuck Diedrich had it set as a drug rehab, where it was a limited program in 3 phases, where you actually progressed through and after 2 to 3 years graduated the program and moved on. Back in, they started in 1958, sometime after 58, while Chuck Diedrich had Synanon operating in Southern California. Mel came in as what's called the square. He had never been a drug user or abuser in his life, but he really liked the methods that Synanon used to for self-improvement in many ways. And he was in awe of the way that they were able to take these junkies off the street and somehow rehabilitate them in his eyes and everyone else's. He became a very active member of Synanon, and in that time he met one of the Chuck Diedrich's right-hand men, as it's called, a guy named Bill Lane, and they struck up a really strong friendship. Now, in '64, Synanon came into some tax troubles, and Chuck Diedrich decided that it would become the Church of Synanon so that he could get his, exemptions and such. And around that time, he also changed the philosophy of Synanon to where it was no longer a graduated program and became a lifetime rehabilitation. That fell more in line with cult philosophies and with the religion or Church of Synanon. And at that point, Mel decided he didn't want anything more to do with Chuck and Synanon. It was getting a little bit too extreme. So in '64, '65, Mel, who at this point had a furniture store out in Palm Springs, that's where his income came from, a lot of it donated to Synanon, as I would expect. He started bringing troubled youth that he saw on the streets, drug users and things of the like, into his home in Palm Springs. And later on in '66 or '67, he bought a house in Reishi Canyon, where it was said that he had at least 25 to 30 kids, 13 to 24 years old, living there while the place was incorporated as a not-for-profit. So at this time, he was basically trying to imitate Synanon on his own because he disagreed with some of the changes that Chuck Diedrich had made. But the overall philosophy of Synanon was such that he still loved and respected it enough to name the school CEDU, C-E-D-U, or Charles E. Diedrich University. This see yourself as you are and do something about it is some bullshit that they came up with when Chuck Diedrich went nuts and started trying to kill people, and the Synanon Association had to be severed, and all the lingo had to be changed, and they had to distance. So at that time, everybody who went to CEDU knew it was Chuck E. Diedrich University, I'm sure, because Mel Wasserman was making his own CEDU that involved a graduation term and no religious component. It wasn't the Church of CEDU. He went not-for-profit originally, and bounced around until the late '70s when the not-for-profit was dropped and the Running Springs property was purchased. Before that, if you were a resident at CEDU, you were getting a job, you were out on the street panhandling, selling vouchers for raffles and things of that nature to support the CEDU not-for-profit. Somewhere between in the '70s, when the Running Springs property was purchased, Mel decided to change it from a not-for-profit to a for-profit corporate business and corporate structure. When he did that, he ended up generating so many funds because he had so much interest from the court systems, from judges, from concerned parents, all these people saying, hey, take my kid. You've done all this great work. You've got this not-for-profit that's so successful at turning kids around. And whether or not it was based on Synanon, people didn't know. They only looked at select results of people coming out of this program. And eventually, he had too many people wanting to come in and not enough revenue to expand and accept all these new enrollees. And he changed it to a for-profit system, and before he knew it, money was coming in hand over fist. They bought the old Walter Houston Lodge in Running Springs, a very large mansion and property, already of high property value at the time. One with a very, very strong Hollywood history to it. If you'd ever seen the inside of it, it was a storybook lodge, the perfect place to organize something like this, with plenty of exterior buildings and attached buildings to build dorms on and things of that nature. That wasn't enough, and the money was kept coming in. And in 1982, a whole bunch of the original CEDU staff decided to split off. And they founded all the Idaho properties up north of Sand Point, south of Bonner's Ferry, up near Ruby Ridge, Idaho, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with the whole Randy Weaver ATF saga. That was literally a mile away from the CEDU Idaho properties. One interesting fact is that any Jewish population, such as myself, was most likely sent to the CEDU Running Springs campus because the staff that was hired on the Idaho properties from the local population had a very large contingent of Aryan Nation there, as I found out at my little tour of Ascent, a little Jewish boy at Ascent. Um, I digress. In 1989, after the Idaho properties were founded in 82, they expanded their profit and admission sources, started taking money from government sources, from private capital firms, from charitable firms. Instead of being a not-for-profit, they now started accepting money from not-for-profit foundations and firms and charities in order to pay to admit less fortunate students. So it was a complete turnaround to the profit system that allowed such a massive expansion. And around 1992, CEDU opened their middle school on the Running Springs campus and started opening Northwest Academy on their Idaho campuses for the most severe behavioral problems or challenges amongst students. And that was when they started their peak. From between 1992 and 1998, when they were sold to the Brown schools, was when CEDU was running rampant and roughshod, completely unmonitored. You had two kids that went missing under suspicious circumstances. You had a serial killer on staff working for a pedophile psychiatrist who I'll tell you plenty more about in my experience. You had a culture of abuse that was completely unchecked in a for-profit model that the sky was the limit in their eyes. It wasn't until the Brown schools took over in 1998 and then some more incidences happened. They started losing control. The Brown schools weren't as versed in the Synanon way. They had basically been handed pamphlets of here's how you run a profit. And the staff that had been doing it for so long were moving on to other schools and other pastures because their opportunity to go from employee to family head to running a school of their own had pretty much vaporized at that point. So you had a lot of dispersion and dispersal of faculty in 1998, and that led to a lot more chaos, a lot less control of the student population. And by 2005, the lawsuits had mounted and mounted. A third student named Daniel Ewan had gone missing, and eventually they had gotten shut down. They went bankrupt. So the story ended, or so we thought. But now here we are, almost 20 years after the school shut down, almost 30 years after I left, and survivors are crawling out of the woodwork trying to scream and tell our stories. I mean, we see what Paris Hilton's doing with Provo Canyon and other troubled teen institutions, and we see the death recently at Diamond Ranch Academy and a whole bunch of other instances that just keep on and keep on. So I think the need to come out and tell our stories is growing. I think the more information that comes out about the history of CEDU and Synanon, the more survivors can get out there. And I appreciate you and your platform for allowing us to be able to do so. But that's just the basic general history of the CEDU school. And realize throughout that time, particularly in the early 90s, it was like a T.T.I. staff factory. The turnover amongst the staff at the CEDU school and amongst the CEDU programs was huge. And the major criteria for advancement within that system was having attended a program yourself. If you had, you would start out as an assistant in a family. A year or so later, you would be running your own family as your family had moved on to Boulder Creek Academy or to another CEDU property or even to another affiliated property. I remember we had a family head named Tim Brace. When I first got there, I knew him for 2-3 months. And then I believe he went on to start or run Cascade Academy or Mount Bachelor Academy or one of the others. And then down the road, there were other staff that went off to work for him, and they became family heads at his place, whereas they had just been a family assistant at CEDU. So it was the breeding ground for most of the staff that filtered through most of the other troubled teen institutions throughout the country in the mid to late 90s.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you for that history. That's very, very detailed too. Appreciate that.
Well, it's been researched and researched because the more we understand Synanon and the origins, the more we can understand the prophets and the purpose of the attack therapy and primal scream therapy and methodology and the raps in the game and how they actually warp a person's core programming.
Mm-hmm.
And they cause certain after effects that stick with us for the rest of our lives. But, the history of it and the background and the more information is there, the better people feel about it, the more we can understand exactly how the trauma affected us. Because as Kari stated, as Ricky stated, not so much Delaney. Delaney is very much more in my camp. We didn't see any good out of it. Aside from the people we met who were wonderful people at their core, but in the process of being damaged the same as we were. I love Kari. I love every memory I have of her, except the ones of her sitting across from me in a circle, screaming her eyes out. Or memories of myself doing the same to her about things I didn't believe, didn't understand, and wanted no part of, but felt I had to do to escape my own punishment. So it created complicated trauma-based relationships, yes, and ones that I'm at this point in my life much more interested in exploring than I was 10, 15, even 20 years ago, and particularly immediately after the experience. But we all see it differently. A lot of people, particularly those who spent the entire program there, the entire 2.5 years or longer, experienced a lot more privileges, a lot more restoration of freedom, a lot more, you're going with the program, so we'll lessen the grip on you. As for myself, my year there was probably legendary. It was mentioned, I believe, by quite a few people in their own podcasts, particularly if they crossed paths with me there. From the moment I landed until the moment I left, I was on some sort of punishment. And the favorite target of the biggest sadist, I believe, there, a gentleman named Russ Decker. Let's see. So basically, I was a normal kid, just a normal screwed up kid in the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up a Ferris Bueller lifestyle. Matter of fact, I went to a school called Glenbrook North High School, which was in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and the same school that John Hughes, the director, went to. He set a lot of his movies there, and in the movie Ferris Bueller, they used the exterior of the school. I myself, during my second semester of my sophomore year, got a job in the attendance office. This was back in the early 90s when they had those Scantron machines. We used to do tests with them and things like that, but they would have every teacher would have a pack of Scantron cards for every class, and if a student was missing from class, they would pull the card out, put it in a folder, and at the end of the day, last period, I would go around to all the departments, collect all the folders, and then run them through the Scantron machine so that the absences would come up in the dean's computers. good old smart aleck me, I decided in order to be friends with everybody and a Ferris Bueller myself that I would start selling cut days. And I would, for $10, $20, you could cut your first class. You were late for school, that'll be 25 surcharge for last minute. You want the whole day, $100 in my pocket, I pull all your cards. And I made myself a good racket, got in with a lot of different groups, became very socially active, but also involved with a lot of troublemakers at that time. I mean, that's what an in like that gets you. Now, at the end of the year, my sophomore year of high school, a whole bunch of teachers filed into the dean's office with a whole bunch of names saying, I've got to give these students incompletes. They've missed too many days of classes. And the numbers didn't match up with what the dean pulled up on the computer. And it didn't take them very long to figure out what was going on. The police were involved, and eventually I was expelled from public school. I was too much of a wise ass and smart aleck for my own good. The next year of school, I was set, well, let's see. That following summer, as I wasn't going to be going to school with a bunch of my friends, I went to a Grateful Dead show, 1992, Soldier Field, where I overdosed on LSD, psilocybin, cannabis, alcohol, a whole bunch of things that were to be found in the parking lot and readily available to a 16-year-old who was in a whole lot of trouble anyway, so didn't really give much of an F at that point. I ended up running naked through the south parking lot of Soldier Field. When the police tried to arrest me, one of them ended up with a broken arm. I ended up with a fractured skull, the beating of my life, and then booked and processed improperly. As I was 16 years old, they thought it would be funny to put me in a holding cell with another older gentleman who was also naked and had the same bad brown acid. And they thought it would be hilarious, put the two naked guys together, not realizing I was a minor. So when I woke up, all big kid of me, and they found out I was 16, they gave me a paper suit to wear, called my family, had them come pick me up, I bonded me, and I was in court 2 weeks later. The judge told my father that in return for signing a waiver and not suing the city of Chicago for, 30, 40, $50 million for various crimes committed by the Chicago Police Department, from the beating itself, the fracturing of my skull, the refusal of medical attention, to the facilitation of sex crime. Thankfully, nothing happened. I felt fully intact when I woke up, and that guy was passed out on his bench. So, but whatever, they thought it would be funny, but in truth, it was one hell of a crime. So they would drop all the charges, which included quite a few felonies that would have had me locked away and not enjoying that 30 to $50 million from the city until my 30s to 50s. So my father made the deal, and that following fall, I started school on the Northwestern University campus, north of Chicago, at a private school called Roycemore. This was my last shot. My brother, I'm adopted. He was their natural child. He ended up coming down with paranoid schizophrenia, which is what the diagnosis was at the time. Today, it would be schizoaffective disorder with severe major depressive disorder. He was hospitalized. The school they chose was convenient to the hospital that my brother was in. And it was my last shot. About 2 months in, November of my junior year, I ended up just being impatient, and I lit up a joint walking to my car. I had gotten the lead in the school play, which was a dream of mine to be an actor at the time. And I had been doing acting in community theater and other venues for many years. And this school was on the Northwestern University campus. It was guaranteed that if you continued enacting at this private prep school, you would get a drama scholarship to Northwestern, which is pretty much one of the most coveted acting degrees you could get. And I was coming out of a dress rehearsal a couple of days before a program, about 6, 7 at night. I was walking down the street towards my car. I lit up a joint. And lo and behold, the principal in his office with the window open, smelled it. Next thing you know, I'm expelled from another school. At this point, my parents had left it as, we don't know what we're going to do. But what they did was contact what was called an educational consultant. This was a big thing in the 90s. They still exist, but they're not as used or as prolific as they were back then. These educational consultants would usually find you a college. They would, for middle class and wealthier families, they would intercede, use their contacts, use their knowledge of the educational system and the different colleges and programs they had to find you the right fit. But if you happen to have a troubled teen, these educational consultants also knew all about these troubled teen institutions. Back in 2000 and what was it, 2002, when I worked for Coronado Academy of Costa Rica, my job was basically to market to these educational consultants and the NATSAP, whatever, National Association for the Bullshit Programs That Hurt Kids. Yeah. So, anyhow, at that point, my parents told me that we were going to look at a few different schools. And one of those schools we ended up going to look at was St. John's Military Academy up in Wisconsin, that I was not keen on. And then my parents were like, okay, well, we'll just go tour another place out in California. And I was like, oh, cool, trip to California. We went out there, and unlike St. John's, during this tour, they did the old, tour and drop routine. Those who didn't get an escort at their bedside at 3, 4 in the morning saying you can come the easy way or the hard way, because they all thought they were Dirty Freaking Harry. I mean, they had to use the Dirty Harry line every damn time. I don't know why they thought it was so effective, or whether they thought it made you scared of them or something. I don't know, but there's not a person who was picked up by an escort service who won't tell you. They said, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And honestly, they did say that to me when they picked me up from CEDU to take me to Ascent. Just a thing they say. But I didn't get that. I got we're going for a tour, we're going to check it out. And while I was in there, or while I was getting my little tour, my father filled out some paperwork, dropped off a check, and then got in his car and left. By the time I got back to the administration building from the tour, I noticed that his car was gone. In tears, I asked what the hell was going on, and they said, don't worry about it. Come in here and take off all your clothes. So, that this is how it went. My first day, one of the things that happened, there was a girl named Rachel. I cannot remember her last name. I remember her as having red hair, but I may be mistaken. I never got to know her specifically because of my first day there. She was the one who was set to take me on my tour while my father was, getting ready to leave. And she did. And when she came up and introduced herself, I reached out my hand to take hers, to shake her hand. She took it, and then Russ, who was the one who met my father, he was Rudy, my family head's number 2 at that time. He met my father there, took him into the admin building, and connected me with this girl, Rachel, who was a couple of peer groups ahead of where I would be, and said, give him a grand tour, be back in 15 minutes. And as she did, I reached out my hand to shake her hand. She grabbed my hand and started pulling me on the tour for a total of maybe 5 to 7 seconds. She had me by the hand and started pulling me to lead me on the tour. The handshake turned into a come this way pull, and then our hands released and we initiated the tour. I mean, I don't really need to tell about the strip search and the fact that there were staff and students watching me as I spread my cheeks and coughed. The doors wide open to everybody else in the admin building as if it was a big joke. I think the point of that was intentional. You don't have any privacy anymore. This is how it's going to be. It's the equivalent of throwing you in the deep end in the cold water. This is how it's going to be. No privacy. Your reasonable expectation of the door closed and males and females and adults and students and propriety in this situation are all out the window. So much for your equilibrium. Get used to it. This is how it's going to be. So that's done intentionally, and it's very violating. I mean, in truth, it's a borderline, and I think many people would consider it an institutional sex crime. You know, this is literally taking a child and putting them on display for other children and adults in a very non-sexualized but completely naked and exposed manner. And it was ridiculous. It really broke a lot of kids on day one. Then my luck, of course, first day was a wrap day. So I got there in the morning, got my tour, got all my stuff searched. Half my stuff was quote unquote put in storage, which actually meant sent back home and or I don't know, actually thrown in storage. I never got it back when I left, so I don't believe that. Only the stuff that was bland. You could have color, but it had to be uniform or maybe a blue flannel. You know, it couldn't be anything with any logos, any style to it whatsoever. That was not allowed in any way, shape, or form. The packing list that they had sent your parents beforehand was very Spartan, with very explicit instructions on the types of gear that you were allowed to have. And it truly, truly did strip any type of identity away from you, unless you just wanted to identify yourself as the guy who had more blue stuff than red or white. But nobody had any black stuff, that's for sure, because that was an image thing. We were introduced to the rules on day one of no singing, only authorized songs, and even authorized songs in the wrong time and place could get you in trouble as well. Pop-offs were what they called unauthorized music, and those were things you had to cop out to in raps, cop out to, they were a disclosure. Pardon my string of lingo that's about to spew forth, but you would cop out disclosures like pop-offs or contracts or other breaking of agreements. No rules, all agreements. Whether you like it or not, you have agreed to this. And if you don't abide by it, you're out of agreement with us. Then there was, the list goes on. I was introduced to bands and what they meant. I was introduced to the concept of peer groups as opposed to grades, that I would be in a peer group with people from age of 13 to 18 years old. And we'd be going to classes together. We'd be doing everything together. So these people are in the same math and social studies and other classes as I am, I guess. The 13-year-old and the 18-year-old. Okay, I'll figure that out later when I eventually get to class, which turns out to be never, because they just give you credit for work ethics, meaning chopping wood at the wood corral or hauling dung up a hill in a wheelbarrow, whatever the task may be. So they have no academics whatsoever, nothing accredited, and no credits that ever transferred anywhere outside the state of California. My time and scholastic education there was wasted. It didn't exist. The expectation of it, even from the brochures that we read ahead of time, was just thrown out the window from day one. I was introduced to the whole family structure as well as the peer group structure. Those kind of crossed, you know, you had your families and your peer groups. So you'd be in a family with people in different peer groups, but the rest of the time you spent with your peer group, and it was just another thing to process. You were introduced to dishes, you were introduced to um, consequences. Hey, that kid over there, don't talk to him. He's on a full time. What's a full time? Well, you can't laugh, sing, smile, talk to anyone you're doing except the staff member and big brother that's running your full time. You got to be on dishes at night, work assignments during the day, and then breakfast, lunch, and dinner you eat and do writing assignments on your table where nobody else is allowed to sit. You got to walk with an escort to and from the dorms, and while you're in the dorms, you're not allowed to talk to anybody, sit, smile, laugh, touch, talk, acknowledge the presence of anyone else. And this goes away. How long does that last? Oh, as long as it's necessary, I guess, for someone to get back into agreement. These are all the rules that you're bombarded with on day one. Fortunately for me, my first day, like I said, had a rap. And in that rap, I was accused of having a sex contract with Rachel, who I had just met 5 hours earlier, because somebody had seen me holding hands with her out front of the admin building. And that constituted a sex contract, and therefore I should be put on bans from her, which I promptly was for the rest of my year there. So I never actually got to know Rachel beyond that first introduction to CEDU. She was the sacrificial lamb that was used to fully introduce me and get me fully blasted and thrown off balance in every single way on day one. And that's the typical experience in the typical troubled teen institution, but it was perfected at CEDU, dare I say. You know, from the drop off or the abduction to the strip search, the witnesses to the strip search, which are organized ahead of time, to the setup for the first rap, which most people will tell you when they got there, it was on a rap day. They had a rap that day. Otherwise, if they got there the day before a rap, then they just gave the staff an extra day to set them up for that rap coming up. But it was a standard operating procedure that was meant to basically throw you to a complete loop. Now, for me, I had a very hard time adjusting from the very beginning. I was never able to just smush with someone after going through a rap with them. Um, to this day, when someone touches me and I'm not fully expecting it, I get that deep chill that runs through my body, uncontrolled. And I fully attribute that to the smushing, whether it be with staff or other students or however it went.
And smushing is the snuggling. What is smushing again?
Smushing was the policy by which, particularly after raps, so in order to make sure that people didn't hold grudges and anger after running their anger and doing their work in raps, after being confronted on shit that may be true or not, that may be apt or appropriate or not, that is completely over and outvalued, meant to break down your core understanding of yourself as a valued and important and competent decision-making person, you were expected to leave the rap circle and they would play some real sappy, what I call CEDU snot sucker music. It would be some John Denver or some Carly Simon or some James Taylor or some stuff to really drag out the emotion in you. And the staff would position themselves at different places around the main floor of the lodge. And everybody would be expected to just kind of pile on and find a spot up against each other. Occasionally, senior students who were in higher level peer groups would isolate themselves and start their own smush piles. just of students, but it was male and female. Gender didn't matter. Non-sexual was the point, the intention, and you're not allowed to, be touching people in inappropriate places, although there are plenty of stories of that kind of thing happening, both voluntary and involuntary. A specific staff member with repeated accusations of inappropriate touching was named Martin Weens, I believe, who went on to work in other programs and face quite a few prosecutions for such. I do believe in the end he may have been taken down by one, but I'll have to look at that. But you'll find testimony from everywhere he's ever worked. You'll also find people who found him to be an incredible guy, very kind and supportive, and a respite from the aggression and anger of other staff members.
Interesting.
So, yeah, testimony on both sides about specific people. But the smushing was something that still is impossible to describe today. It was an overwhelming of your sense of touch immediately after an overwhelming of pretty much everything else. It was a forced bonding. And if you had literally been roasted, ripped to shreds by someone particularly hard in a rap session previous, that would be the person. The director of the rap would say, Michael, you need to smush with this person after the rap. Basically to try and diffuse anything they still saw between the two parties. And it was literally forced physical connection. And it, to this day, it still makes my skin crawl to think about too much. But there were many, many different policies and agreements and rules, and many of them are gone over in so many different podcasts. I really hate to beat a dead horse, and anybody who responds to the CEDU tag on these podcasts like I do has most likely been there or researched enough about it to know the rules. Needless to say, we went through RAPs, which were a transformation and amalgamation of the game, started by Chuck Diedrich and Synanon, carried on by CEDU, and then renamed and appropriated by troubled teen institutions, including the one you went to. The attack therapy was the central core of it. The response with primal scream therapy was the central goal of the attack therapy. So the object was for the staff to bring up an attack on you based upon some rule that you broke that it was impossible not to fucking break in the first place. So you're set up no matter what. Everybody in that room is set up somehow, either by another student, by another staff, or by breaking some obscure rule that literally is impossible not to break in the situation that they put you in at that time. And you know you're going to get roasted in the rap about it, but they set it up so that everybody can attack you, your peers as well as the staff. And you remember the process, someone's sitting next to you, got to get up and walk across the room and switch seats. The more times you saw people switching seats, the hotter it was getting. That's how you knew it was going to be a hot hit, a hot rap, and that your hot seat was getting hotter and hotter. The more people kept getting up and wanting to switch to that seat across from you. When that seat was as valuable as gold to everybody in the room, that's when you knew, oh, this is going for a few hours, unless I'm willing to scream about how big a piece of shit I am, how I'm responsible for being molested when I was a kid because I just wanted the attention. And I'm willing to basically warp my core self and these core issues deep down in my id, Not even ego-driven issues, not the protector, not the manager, not any of these other ego concepts, but the core programming of self. I'm going to warp that and accept what you're saying, that I'm just as big a piece of shit as you think. And then I'm going to scream at the floor until snot starts dribbling down my face like I just came out the gas chamber in basic training. And then, and only then, will the abuse stop. This is the concept and what a rap or the game is. And it's pretty devastating, particularly 3 days a week on that regular schedule. Raps as well were stuck into the profits. Fortunately, I only went through 2 profits in my 1 year there. Out of the 7, I went through the truth and the children's profit. They were bad enough. These raps and these attack therapy sessions being thrown in the middle of a 24 to 36 hour workshop, that's another thing entirely. As far as breaking a person down, I highly recommend Lathrop Lybrook. Lathrop Lybrook is a survivor, I believe, of RMA. She has a website called lathroplybrook.com, and she has been assembling and coalescing information regarding CEDU and the CEDU program of family of schools, or family of services as they called themselves. And on it, she has guidebooks and programs from staff members on the format of the different profits. So if you're trying to go down memory lane about how that abuse was put together and laid out, she's got the blueprints and the receipts, so to speak, on her website. Highly recommended for anyone who's trying to remember the profits and how devastating and damaging they were. You know, it's a useful tool to be able to go back and check those out. But for me, it was, I think, 2 to 3 months of severe fighting and struggling against. I went through my truth profit about 6 months in, 5 to 6 months in, because I was one of the first in my peer group to arrive. Around that point, right after the truth profit, I had been in trouble all the time. Rudy Bentz was my family head, and Rudy was kind of aloof towards me. He was looking towards his future, along with his wife, Jill Bentz, who also worked at the school. I believe she was a family head of her own. His number 2, Russ Decker, though, had taken a particular interest in me. I think he believed if he could break me, that he could prove himself worthy of becoming a family head himself. And he made sure that I was never in anybody else's raps. I was a fixture in every Russ rap there was. If he was running a rap, I was in it. The only way I got out of it was if he was taking a day off, had a family emergency. Might have happened once or twice. But I never experienced a rap with anybody else. I mean, I heard some people ran them a little easier, some, well, none harder and more intense and aggressive than Russ and Rudy. And I could always count on being in the hot seat for at least a portion of every rap that I was in. There was never a rap off, as I saw some folks get. I was also a very convenient rap request, because there would always be something to get involved in to attack me on. And if you were seen attacking sufficiently enough, a lot of times that would get you out of being on the hot seat. Although if you attack too much, that would instantly put you on the hot seat. You know, the staff would be like, wait a minute, now you're trying to do my job. Why are you blah, blah, let's change the focus on you. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I went too far. But, you know, you remember raps, you've been there. For me, it really came about after the truth. I had been fighting. I had been on a few full times. I had been on work assignments nonstop. Russ had made my life a living hell, and I got sent to see the psychiatrist. Um, their medical staff was off campus. At this time in the early 90s, they still believed in medication. It wasn't something they endorsed very often. A lot of kids came in on medication and they continued that. For a lot of them, they tried to get them off their medication. And for some, they put on medication if they felt they weren't being compliant enough. There was a meds office in the main lodge, up a staircase, up on this little second floor closet area, where they administered meds twice a day, mornings and evenings. You formed your med line, I believe, going up this stairway to get your meds, and then you came back down when you had them, and you took them. They did a tongue check sometimes if you were known not to take them regularly. But they didn't have a doctor on staff that literally worked on premises, neither psychiatrist nor physician, nor anything even close to it. What they did do was contract from the local town, Running Springs. This was one of the ways that they kept the town involved in the school. They employed a lot of people. That way, when these people saw one of the students as a runaway, the first call they made was to the school or the sheriff. When the sheriff got a call about a runaway student, it was tase first and bring him to the front door, no matter what they say. I mean, they could talk about a murder in the building. Doesn't matter. They're lying. Tase them, hog tie them, drop them at the front door. And that was the community's response to being brought in. But their doctor, they had a doctor, an old guy in Running Springs that they had for a regular doctor who I believe gave me allergy medication and other things. And then they had a psychiatrist on call who lived in Running Springs as well, named Dr. Burnell Forgy. Dr. Burnell Forgy worked for quite a few different troubled teen institutions as a psychiatric consult over time. He was one of the predators that the troubled teen institutions breed and attract. He realized that it was a population of vulnerable youth with zero accountability and the ability to become the supervision, and he gravitated towards it. Burnell Forgy also had a patient named James Lee Crummell. This patient had been previously convicted of a rape and murder of a young boy. He had served some time, gotten out on technicalities. His story is a long, complicated one in which the justice system failed many times. But Forgy was his psychiatrist. And Forgy, as a pedophile himself, gravitated and lived vicariously through Crummell. So Forgy let Crummell live in his house, hired him on as his assistant, and brought him with to the school and had him present for psychiatrist visits in Forgy's house. Many a rape of a student took place in the home of Burnell Forgy at the hands of Forgy and Crummell. During the time of their tenure at the school and residence up in Running Springs, not only did 2 kids go missing from the school, but another from the local population as well. Who was not a CEDU student, was abducted off the streets and later tied to Crummell and Forgy. Unfortunately, Forgy died and Crummell died on death row before confessing to any of the murders of Blake Pursley and my gosh, what were their names? I know them. John Inman. Those were the 2 that disappeared in 93, 94. One while I was there, one right before I got there, I believe. So those will forever remain unanswered. A gentleman named Medium Anonymous, also known as David Safran, he did a lot of investigating into this, a lot of follow-up as well with a detective in the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. And it seems that there is an internal cover-up going on where even detectives within the department are shut down by their superiors when they try to ask questions about these cases. So answers are not forthcoming and never will be. They will just be a part of the CEDU lore and history, I suppose. But I got sent to see Dr. Forgy. They wanted to medicate me. I was not having it. My parents were resistant to it. And my first visit with Dr. Forgy was incredibly uncomfortable. I knew something was wrong with him and with this guy that was there too. I didn't think I should be having a doctor's visit in some guy's house, not in an office. I didn't think there should be two very, very uncomfortable men in the office or in the home doing this visit. It just didn't seem like the place where you go to get medication. I had seen psychiatrists many, many, many times. You know, my parents had sent me to see them. This was just not it. And thankfully, nothing happened to me there. They didn't make any advances. It was just a very uncomfortable and odd experience, but enough so that the following day I did my first split and I left from the campus. I got not too far away. I got to Running Springs. And like I say, I got tased by a sheriff. And instead of brought back to the school, he threw me in the back of his police car in handcuffs, recovering from the tasing. And then Bill Lane showed up in his car. And the sheriff transferred me from the back seat of his car into Bill Lane's car. And Bill Lane took me to get some ice cream and basically explained to me, you know, what a power struggle was and how I would never win one. And that, you know, if I left, I would be dead and saner in jail within a week, and about all the Denzians, and we just had a kid go missing a while back. That we went down the backside. That was what they would say about Pursley and Inman, is that they went down the backside and went missing. But then he drove me back to the front doors, and I was right back at school at CEDU and on a full time. As part of that full time, um, Russ Decker put me digging out a stump. Now, I can send you pictures of this stump, actually, of myself and the stump, so you can get an idea. But it was a massive ponderosa pine stump right at the entrance to the campus, right as the road split, the entry road split between the middle school and the high school. There was just this big stump there. It went about 6-7 feet deep into the ground. It was about the root spread where I had to cut in order to get through was about 5 to 6 feet in radius, not even diameter. And it was a never ending project. After a month of being on this stump, uh, and a full-time table on bands from everyone in the school, dishes at night, missing out on everything, uh, writing assignments. I had gone through 3 or 4 full notebooks of writing assignments, and the writing assignments were ridiculous. You know, they were also meant to break you down. Like they would put at the top of the page, "Why do I feel the need to lie to my peers?" And the next page, "Why do I feel the need to lie to my parents?" And then the next page, "Why do I feel I need to lie to Russ?" And then they'd start with, "Why do I need to lie to my big brother?" And you'd have to write an entire full page on each one of these things, basically tearing yourself to pieces, and I lie because I'm a piece of shit, and I know I'm a piece of shit, and I don't want people to know I'm a piece of shit, so I make things up to make myself look cooler. And that's the only thing they'll accept, is if you take your core programming and shit all over it and warp it for them, then okay, I'll take that as an acceptable one. Otherwise, write it again. 2 pages this time. So after a month of all that fun stuff, I split again. This time I got all the way down the mountain before things just kind of fell apart. I can't remember who caught me, how I got brought back, but needless to say, I did. And that very night, I think I came back 3, 4 in the afternoon. I got dropped off at CEDU property. Midnight, 1 a.m. that very night, there were the bouncers or the transporters or the escorts or whatever you want to call them at the side of my dorm bed. And we can do this the hard way or we can do this the easy way. Next thing you know, on a flight to Spokane, Washington, and in a car for a long drive up to the Idaho Panhandle in Ascent. At Ascent, I really couldn't get along. Ascent was meant to be a 6-week program in the Idaho wilderness. It was 2 weeks at base camp, 2 weeks on what they called course, which was a hike through the northwestern Idaho and northwestern Montana, through the Selkirks and the Cabinet Mountains for 2 weeks. Then after that 2 weeks, you did 2 more weeks at base camp before you graduated and went back to whatever program you were going off to. Nobody went home after Ascent. Ascent was not you do your 6 weeks and go home. Everybody there was headed to one of the CEDU schools afterwards. They were going either to Boulder Creek, to Rocky Mountain, Northwest Academy. They were going to the CEDU High School. They were going somewhere within the program after Ascent. Or they had come from somewhere within the program. I did 2 weeks there, and within those first 2 weeks, I got in quite a bit of trouble. I remember Kari brought up the guy who used to do the morning PT there. Ascent was run very much like basic training in the military, as I came to find out when I did my military service. And there you have the red, white, and blue phase of basic training. The red phase is the first third of it, where you basically tear them down, break them to shreds, they make them puke every 10 minutes and cry home for mama. The white phase is teach them that they're all right, they're competent, they can handle this, make them work real hard and learn some real stuff. The blue phase is build up their confidence, let them know how to use what they've learned and bring them back to the world in your own image. This is the basic essence of the breakdown build up. This was applied at Ascent. The first 2 weeks was sort of a red phase. You were screamed at everywhere you went. You could never not break the rules. You spent all day cutting wood, carrying logs back to base camp that no child should be forced to carry, splitting wood with the sledge and wedge because you couldn't have an axe. A regular axe that could be used as a weapon. So you used a steel wedge that you would kind of tap in there, and then you would have to slam it with a sledgehammer and it would split the wood the hard old-fashioned way. All day long, filling up a wood corral so that come winter, both Ascent and Northwest and all the Idaho properties could have fuel for their fireplaces. They all took from Ascent and the work camp that was there. After the first 2 weeks, you're supposed to go on course on your wilderness experience that includes your 3-day solo, where they drop you off all by yourself with nothing but a bear whistle and some trail mix, maybe a sleeping bag. And then the third part was supposed to be more work, but not as much, a little bit more, experiential talking in the dining area about different issues and behavior stuff, and then a big old graduation circle and all that stuff. At the end of I was still non-compliant. So in my first 2 weeks, I kept getting in trouble at Ascent to the point they had me on a stump with galoshes on. They had taken my boots, so I couldn't run. I couldn't go anywhere. All I had were galoshes. Had a big old red or orange vest on, like a high-vis vest. And I had to sit there all day out in the beating sun in the center of this circle with teepees on one side and the whole infrastructure built around it, sitting on this stump. I still decided to go for a walk. So they decided that since sitting on a stump wasn't enough, they talked with Russ Decker back at CEDU, and they decided that they were going to cut down a tree and have me dig out the stump, as I had already been doing for a month over at CEDU. So after about 2 weeks of this, or about a week of digging out this stump, I realized that my group that I got there with had already gone out on course, meaning I was stuck for at least another 2 extra weeks at Ascent. And they were going to have me spend those 2 extra weeks digging out a stump again. Well, my hands were already cut, bloody, the calluses I still have damage from them to this day, were ridiculous. And I broke down and hoarded my Prozac, took about a week's worth of it at one time, got a little bit of a buzz and some boldness, and swung my pickaxe at First Lieutenant Sean O'Connor of the U.S. Army Rangers. Swung it at his head because I had a shovel and a pickaxe to dig out this stump, and he was standing there just screaming at me up on the edge of it as I'm digging, and I just had enough, and I jumped out of it, and I swung the thing at his head looking to kill him. Thankfully, he was well-trained military. He blocked it, took me down very hard. And from there, I was shuttled hogtied and brought down to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to Northern Idaho Behavioral Health, which is an inpatient hospital. They have a youth wing there. And my first 3 days were literally spent in the padded room. First day in a straitjacket in the padded room. Day 2 and 3 in the padded room with the one chicken wire window in the metal door, padded metal door. And then for the rest of my 2 weeks that I spent there, I was in a room with another guy, I believe like 19, 20 years old. So it was adults and adolescents mixed in that place. They medicated the hell out of me there, brought me back to Ascent. And from there, I learned that I had to go with it, that I was going to lose in the power struggle, that in the end, I would end up in a padded room, wasting my life away, and that things could always get worse. Provo Canyon was on the table. They had been threatening very much to send me to Provo, which was the last resort school. That was more of a lockup than it was a Synanon troubled teen institution. Excuse me. Paris Hilton will tell you all of her stories about that place. They're very easy to find. But that place, although it did have some component of troubled teen institution and Synanon-based therapeutic schooling, it was more based around locking people up, giving people isolation and other types of, more rampant abuse. So Provo Canyon is a different animal to itself, and Godspeed to her getting that place shut down. Whew. But at that point, I learned that I'm in it. I returned back to CEDU, straight to my full time that I had left on, and finishing that stump out front of the school.
What is it? What is a full time again? Was
Now,
that
a full time is the full time consequences. Now, you could be on a table, or you could be on work assignments, or you could be on dishes individually. If you were on a table, you were doing writing assignments during your meals and sitting alone, but you might go on about your normal business during the day, have bands to part of the school, be on minor dinner dishes, cleaning part of the dining room. Whereas if you're on a full-time, you're on a table doing writing assignments, you're on dishes doing back kitchen, with the sterilizer or pots and pans, and you're doing work assignments all day long, unless you're in wraps, and you're on bands from everyone. The full-time was basically a combination of all the other punishments put together. That was where they were like, well, I'm going to need your full attention while I truly fuck with you.
Okay.
Yeah, but I came back to my full time. This time, Rudy Bentz had left while I was at Ascent, and Russ Decker was now in charge of Rudy's family, and Russ was now my family head. And he let it be known in no uncertain terms that it wasn't going to be like it was before I left for Ascent, and that he was in charge now and he wasn't going to have any of the problems, or it was going to be straight to Provo if he didn't literally beat the hell out of me himself out back of the dorms. This was a threat he put in my face. Let's see. I finished my stump. As rough as it was, as ridiculous as it was, as tough as it was, I had to finish it. Another month was spent digging, just digging, uh, until I finally got off of the full-time and off of the stump. About a month after that, I realized, well, no, around the time I got back, I realized that my peer group had gone through the Brothers Prophet and I had not made it. I had been away at Ascent. So I got dropped a peer group at that point, to the point where I had to go through the Children's Prophet again for a second time and do it with a completely different group of people. That was quite an interesting experience. Shortly after that, um, my folks found out that that also involved an extra 6 months of me being at CEDU, and that their finances were not as uh, their pockets were not as deep as most of the residents of CEDU. That became an issue, and on the day the bill came due, 1 year to the day after I got there, they pulled me out. I still wasn't welcome to come home at that point, so I was sent to a reform prep school in Connecticut until my 18th birthday, January of, I believe, 1994. So from November until January, I went to the Woodhall School in Bethlehem, Connecticut. Much less of a therapeutic component. What there was not so attack therapy based as more transitional living, trying to get you from, most of the kids there had come from T.T.I programs and were transitioning, trying to get into college. Although it did have a reputation in New England as that school, when it came to sports and things like that, they made sure their girlfriends and parents and everybody stayed home when we came to play. Because they knew fighting was coming, and it was those kids. Uh, I left there on my 18th birthday, but I still wasn't welcome to come home. My parents told me I would have to live on the streets, find my own way. They would never support me. I didn't have a resume or a background in anything at that point, so they sent me to another transitional living program for adults out in Oregon. I forgot the name of it. It was in Bend, Oregon. After about 3 to 4 months there, I had lost all hope of ever rejoining the world again. I embraced the rejection of my family and the damage that CEDU had done. I attempted suicide. Took a massive overdose of lithium. Uh, Thankfully, middle of the night, one of my roommates came in, realized something was wrong, called 911, and got me to the hospital just in time to put me on dialysis and save my kidneys and my life. After that, I finally got my ride home and started life. I worked in retail furniture management, which was my family's business, and then outside my family's business for Ashley Furniture Home Stores and others until 2007. I did those stints working in those troubled teen institutions until I really realized what they were about. I did those based upon a personal relationship with someone I had met at CEDU, an administrator who I still to this day can't tell if he had good or bad intentions in maintaining a relationship with me after my time at CEDU. It did seem like there was a bit of grooming involved, whether it was professional or sexual. And um, those stories are for another time. He's now deceased, and I won't speak ill of the dead, especially ones who may have really just been trying to help. You know, the ambivalence out of some of these folks, the ability to hurt all the while appearing to try and help is legendary. It's something I've never been able to reconcile and understand properly, but it's there, and it's part of what we all deal with to this day. Either way, it was probably the worst year of my life. And I found out years later, now that I've been in the last couple of years doing active counseling therapy and work with psychedelic medicine and other things, trauma based and focused therapy, that the core programming changes that CEDU put into me and instilled in me have been my worst enemy all of my life. Um, the CPTSD that I have today, I've had before I even went into the military. I just added to it with the military. I was already in a trauma mindset, headspace, and path when I went into the military, which is why it made sense. That's why my drill sergeants didn't mess with me very much, nor did any others. Um, I I've come to the realization after all this time that the damage done by CEDU was probably the most impactful and most defining traumas that contributed to the formation of my CPTSD and the struggles that I've experienced ever since. Everyone that I've run into and spoken with who's a survivor of the CEDU school has certain affectations that can be traced back to CEDU and the CEDU experience, whether they have reconciled it in their mind, gone through the build-up phase towards the end, and are able to look at it and said, but good things did happen there and blah, blah, in order to justify its existence or their experience and make it not so bad. They're still walking around with certain changes to their core programming and their own self-worth and self-value that will haunt them in many ways that they may not even recognize and realize. So it's something that the whole world needs a new understanding of institutional abuse, its effects. CPTSD is not in the DSM at this point. PTSD is, but that chronic PTSD from repetitive institutional trauma, that kind of thing, still unexplored, still undefined. We still don't have a path to healing that is understood even half as much as we do for veterans or survivors of other types of institutional abuse. So, it was traumatic, but it was very defining. It was It was something that in order to self-actualize moving forward at my age at 46 with the damage that's been done both with the CPTSD and the T.T.I that I experienced from Afghanistan, the only path to true self-actualization and use of the CEDU experience is through exposure efforts and things like I've been doing. Telling my story helps. It helps me process it. It may help someone else process it. I noticed that when I did the Cult Vault podcast episodes, Carrie actually posted a few comments on YouTube to it. I had trouble getting in touch with her, but I do hope that I inspired her to, hear Delaney and get in touch with you and share her story. It was wonderful to hear. Um, it parallels my own in so many ways, and all of ours are very similar. Um, I may suggest for a finale on the whole CEDU issue, maybe getting the whole gang together.
Yeah, that's been recommended. Actually, you're not the only person that's recommended that. So I'm trying to put something like that together. Maybe we can all be on like a group call and kind of just have like a group discussion. That's what I was thinking.
Well, um, I think it would never be a bad thing. A lot of things will come to light. A lot of memories are jogged by other people's experiences. I'm sure there are many things that I've blocked out. Sure, there are many things that Carrie and Ricky and Delaney have all blocked out about CEDU, and that we may be able to, remind each other of. The complexity and the entropy of it was incredible. It was one of those things where your entire world had to change because you were not in our shared reality anymore. Your new shared reality was warped and twisted, and in it, you were a villain, and there was no way around that. And the only way to avoid being dead, insane, or in jail was to get with the CEDU program, to take the attack therapy to heart, to believe that you were the piece of shit that they tell you are, and to give everything to them in their way of rebuilding you in the coming years. Um, Unfortunately, I never got to that rebuilding part, or maybe it's fortunate. I mean, I noticed with Carrie and Ricky, there was a lot more, the two who completed the program, there was a lot more, I don't want to call it excuse making. I don't want to call it anything negative. It was more acceptance of some sort of benefit, some sort of positive and its existence out of CEDU. Whereas Delaney and myself, who didn't completely finish the high school program, were more a little bit, yeah, the whole thing was a big ball of effed up. We're not as able to make those excuses because we didn't get that little snippet at the end that allows them to release people into the world confidently and know that they won't come back and sue.
Yeah.
And that was programming. That was intentional on their part of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. You said you were adopted, right?
I am. And the strange thing about the troubled teen institutions is that the general population, I think us adopted folks, are less than 1% of the population. But in troubled teen institutions, particularly CEDU, I would say that number was much closer to 15 to 20% of the people there. It was a very large selection, and it was not a shock, surprise, or anything to have someone new come in and as a part of their story, which we had to tell our story to everyone every week. You had to tell your complete story to one new person, but as a part of that. It was very common to hear people say, I was adopted at age blank. Just, that was par for the course for CEDU. I believe it was the same for the entire troubled teen industry, but I can't say for certain without actually checking those numbers.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
But being adopted does, any psychiatrist or psychologist will tell you that being adopted does create sort of a distancing between yourself and your family and an individual need for self-verification. When you're adopted, your parents can tell you the stove is hot, but you still have to touch it. When you're
Absolutely.
not, there's enough of a connection with your genetic connection with your parents. There's this innate trust and belief in them that you can say, oh, it's hot. All right, I won't touch it. It's the reason why adopted kids end up having to experience things. They can't take your word for it.
Ain't that the truth? Because I'm adopted too. Adopted at birth. Did you ever? Were you put into foster care, or what happened in your situation?
No, I was adopted at birth as well. I was taken home by a Jewish family in the suburbs of Chicago. If you take a good look at me, I'm a Viking. So I still got to do the 23andMe and ancestry DNA testing, find out what kind of blood I have. But I'm blonde hair, blue eyes, blue-green eyes, and my folks are Ashkenazi. They have very Semitic features, black hair, brown eyes, typical hawkish features. And I found out when I was about 7 years old. We came back from kindergarten, filling out that little piece of paper. What color are your parents' eyes and hair, and the basics of genetics and what you might look like when you grow up. And it just didn't. 2 + 2 made 7.
Yeah.
And at that point, my parents just sat me down. They told me I was adopted. And I remember my immediate reaction was running downstairs to my older brother's room and saying, "Did you know you weren't my brother?" And him saying, "Yeah, but I wasn't allowed to tell you."
Yeah.
And at that point, I felt that not only were they not my family, but they had held a big secret from me and betrayed me in the process, making me even more of an outsider. So there was a separation there. I never lived up to my brother's example, never got the grades that he got, so never got the rewards that he earned. I was always the troublemaker, the black sheep. My lock was on the outside of my bedroom door. I spent most of my childhood incarcerated or sent to psychiatrists for behavior problems. I was kicked out of my first school in kindergarten, my second one after first grade. I had always had a bit of behavioral issues, but the adopted portion and that distance between myself and my family was always a bit of a subconscious motivator in that. And it also allowed in my teenage years, when arguments and fights with my parents got bad enough, I had the nuclear option. I could just scream, "You aren't my fucking parents anyway," and then slam the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So who? Your parents? The parents that sent you to CEDU.
mhm.
Were they the ones that adopted you at birth?
Yes, they're the only parents I've known. I met my birth mother when I was 21. Um, I got a little bit of information. Turns out she was adopted as well. So I'm second generation adoptee. That's why she didn't have an abortion. She carried me to term and put me up for adoption because she herself had been adopted and she felt obligated in that form. She didn't feel that it would be fair to her existence and the chance she was given in life if she didn't do the same. So that's how I came to be in that respect. But yes, they're the ones who sent me. My parents, I call my adopted parents my parents, and then I have a birth mother and a birth father I've never met. The birth mother I've talked to 3 or 4 times in my life. Not a very big part of it, just enough to get a little bit of health information. Let's see.
Have
My
you
parents
talked?
and I have had a lot of issues, particularly post CEDU. Thankfully, my parents have always been the type who have always wanted to do the best for me. They were taken in and sold the false bill of goods by Harriet Gershman of Harriet Gershman and Associates Educational Consulting, Evanston, Illinois. Okay, they were sold a completely false bill of goods about how I would get the help I needed and how this would be the best thing for me. And this is like a resort. They've got a tennis court and a swimming pool, and look at this, they do horseback riding and wilderness exercises, and they'll get in shape and fit. And they got sold the snake oil that they believed would help me. I tried being angry and mad at them for a long time. Even after I got past the whole, they got lied to and sold this false idea, it came down to the whole, why wouldn't you believe me when I tried to tell you what was going on? And then they went into the whole, well, they prepped us for that. They had us ready. They had all the things that you might say and did say on a list of things that I might call and say because I want to get out. There were umpteen different manipulation methods they used on parents that they had perfected just as well as the methods they used on us. They even gave the parents a list of the other parents to form a parent support network. Oh, my kid called and said that he just got raped last night in the dorms. Oh my God, I want to take him out. How can this be? Oh no, it's not true. That's not true. Doris said her kid called 3 days ago, said the same thing. And then they hung up the phone. They're all saying it. It's on the list. It's on the list of things they're going to say. Forget about it. They had their own world that was geared and designed towards them doing the work for CEDU, of making us know that we were there. There was no alternative. The parents had been prepped and sold. That's what I say. I mean, at this point, I want to be bitter with them. I want to be angry, but I do believe that they did the best that they could. A lot of parents were negligent. A lot of parents were abusive. I mean, my parents had their abusive ways when I was growing up with like I say, the door lock on the outside of the bedroom, growing up incarcerated in my own home. There was a lot of things that were wrong about the way my parents raised me. But at this point, having had and lost a kid of my own, I understand more how they were human and they were trying to do the best they could at the same time that my brother was going through the worst in his life. Around the time that I was getting kicked out of school after school, my brother, uh, who is their natural child, came down with his mental illness. So they had to deal with that at the same time that I'm getting in trouble, getting arrested, kicked out of schools. They get presented with this beautiful option. All they got to do is throw money at it, and they went with it. And truth be told, if I was in their shoes in that time, in that place, I don't know if I would have been, with what I know now, yeah, it would have been like, hell no, I'm not sending my kid. And with what they know now, they've told me, hell no, we never would have sent you. So, I mean, time is a great healer. I think a lot of folks who still bear grudges really need to put themselves in their parents' shoes and understand how they were taken too. This industry preys upon parents who just don't know what to do, who are at their wits' end, the end of their rope, the end of their experience and knowledge, and who love their kids and want the best for them. That's what makes it so tragic. But yeah, there are also a lot of abandonment cases. There are a lot of parents who are, really privileged out on the road touring and can't be around to raise their kid, and their kid's smoking all their weed while they're out on the road. So they send them off to CEDU. There is a lot of neglect. There is a lot of bad parenting that went into it. But in my case, I don't hold it against them. I've evolved past that. I still hold it against CEDU and Synanon, and I hope Mel Wasserman is not resting peacefully. But hey, at this point, there's not enough left to sue. There's not enough legal action to be taken after it's been shut down so long. The Friends of CEDU's out of business, trying to get money out of Brigitte. It ain't gonna happen. That's Mel's wife. I don't even know if she's still around. Who knows? Who cares? They're gone. CEDU's dead. Now we got to work real hard to get the rest of them shut down.
Yeah, totally agree. So have you told your parents how you feel about like being there? Like, do they know how you feel, or have you just like not?
Oh yes, I went through a lot of it with them. My mother, at first, she cried a lot during the initial conversation, and I could see how much it hurt her to hear this. And it was because she took responsibility for it. She knew that they sent me there and that it wasn't what they had been led to believe. I think she knew when they eventually took me out, even though they took me out for financial reasons, over time, they started seeing the damage that the place did to me and my relationships, my friendships, my headspaces, my ability to communicate, things of that nature. I became huge into self-sabotage. I never allowed myself to have anything good because deep down in my core programming, I didn't believe I deserved it. Because CEDU told me so. They drilled that, beat that into my head and into my soul. So problems with self-worth, with self-sabotage, problems with depression, with confusion, relationships, arguing. Oh, for the many, many, many years, I thrived on arguing. If you started screaming at me in an argument, I was, okay, challenge accepted, rap on. And I could be the harshest, and in those arguments in my relationships, in my 2 failed marriages, the daggers that I learned to throw at CEDU were way too much for any ordinary civilian to bear. So it took a lot of mindfulness and growth over time. And like I say, my parents saw how it hurt me. And then when I finally had the conversation and tried to share my awareness of it and the depth of it, I think I got about halfway through until my mom broke down and I had to stop. And I really felt that I think they get it. I don't need to really bring it up anymore or hold it against them. My father's 81, just turned this month. He's got dementia, a broken hip a couple years ago, a couple of strokes before that. He's in very poor health, not very much longer to go. My mother is 76. She's got an immune system disorder and all sorts of other things. She's 85 pounds soaking wet, maybe 5 foot. They're on their last days. I'm here living in Las Vegas to help out just so that they can, live comfortably. Part of me is forgiving them and being able to forgive them. For CEDU has made it so that I can be here doing what I need to do for them. And for myself, because I know if I moved on with my life without being here for them in their final years, after they adopted me and tried the best they could, then I would regret it. So that cycle of regret would continue. And the only way to really break it is with a bit of forgiveness, particularly towards your family. Ain't nobody got to forgive CEDU or the troubled teen industry, but family, everybody got taken. Everybody. And everybody was victimized. And I saw the pain in my mother's eyes that CEDU caused her too. And that's enough for me.
All right. Well, I wanted to say condolences on your lost child. And also, I just wanted to admire your resilience and just, I can tell that I might be wrong, but you seem to be pretty well put together. Like your thoughts are pretty articulated now. And I just wanted to point out that I admire your resilience.
Well, I appreciate it. And, you know, I hit rock bottom back in 2021 after a really near fatal bout of COVID where I ended up in renal failure. I was followed by a heart attack not long after that. And they left my Widowmaker junction at about 70% blocked when they stented the 100% blockage in my right coronary. So they left me with a sword of Damocles in late 2021, just hanging over my head. And I was ready to end it, just waiting. Every sensation was, is that it? Is that my heart attack? Is it here? Is it starting? What's that pain? I never felt that one before. And I couldn't live. I was literally going insane, ready to end my own life. And what saved me in the end was, if you don't mind a little plug, a clinic called Better You Care, and doing ketamine treatments. Getting into psychedelic medicine has really helped me not only dissociate far enough from the effects of these traumas and the CPTSD to actually deal with it and speak of it without an emotional reaction, but to function in a daily manner and to be able to communicate effectively. So without some real in-depth psychedelic therapy and integration therapy and a good doc and a good clinic and some good progress, I wouldn't even be alive at this point to do this. If you listen to my old Cult Vault podcast, that was right pre-heart attack. I mean, the voice is more like this, and I'm still fully in my trauma headspace, and I'm not communicating clearly, and completely different attitude in a different place. It takes work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, but I'm on that journey, and I'm hoping it gets better, and in time I can help other people along it.
For sure. That's what it's about. For sure. What do you think the hardest part about being in CEDU? Let's do each place you went. So like, what do you think the hardest part about being in CEDU was for you, and how did you deal with it? Like, if you had to choose one thing.
I think the hardest part of CEDU was the isolation. Because, well, it could either have been because I was a very difficult person to deal with personally, or it could have been because I was Russ's favorite pet target. But I became very isolated. I was unable to form close friendships of any kind with anyone. I was almost like the conditions there made me radioactive. So everything I went through alone. And I mean, it's designed that way in many respects. You know, you're put on a full time and you spend 3 months on it. You're alone the whole time. But even when I wasn't, nobody knew me. I was just the guy who was always on dishes, always in trouble, never around for smushing. Nobody's heard my life story. Everybody else has heard everybody else's story, but nobody's heard mine because I never got a chance because I was too busy on work assignments or dishes or something else. So I was always kind of outside. And for the full year that I spent there, I spent that. And even especially even with my peer group, when I made 1 or 2 bonds, I got shuffled to a new peer group after Ascent. Next thing you know, they're moving on, doing profits without me and moving on with the program. And here I am just kind of stirring and waiting. So that's my biggest regret is that it all happened alone. Even to this point, I can't really commiserate about specific events and occurrences like many people can because I didn't have them with others. That would probably be my biggest regret about CEDU. I mean, besides being there at all and creating the situations that led me to be sent there. Um, Otherwise, I would also say fighting as hard as I did in a manner that got me sent to Ascent, because Ascent was a whole different animal. At Ascent, I broke. I fully broke. I mean, I lost myself to the point where I, a 16-year-old kid, was already 180, 190 pounds, swung a pickaxe at a man's head, full force, looking to literally end the man. They broke me and turned me into what they had been accusing me of being the whole time. So at Ascent, I think my greatest regret about that, besides creating the situation that got me there, was still fighting, trying to reject the reality to which I lived, and clinging on to the reality of the world in which I had come from and believed I should be living in. So that dysphoria made it so much worse and brought me to the point where I was on consequences at Ascent as much as I was at CEDU, held back just like I was at CEDU, or recycled, and then driven to the point of complete snapping. Something that became a repetitive pattern in my life. There became, even especially after Afghanistan, the pattern of my CPTSD was becoming overwhelmed by stimuli and stressors, getting a little burst of cortisol into my system that caused my adrenal glands to go into overdrive. Next thing you know, my pressure's jumping, my heart is pounding, my palms are sweating, I'm in full adrenaline battle mode, and it's because somebody parked over the line into my parking spot. And this pattern of reaction got instilled so deeply in me that it became a repetitive pattern that caused me in the end to literally almost die. It almost took my life from me. The isolation I required of myself, and when I spent a couple of years without leaving the house, it wasn't because I was agoraphobic or afraid of the outdoors. It was because I was afraid of my reaction to other people's bullshit. Even my service dog wasn't enough to assure me that I could react properly and not hurt someone. And all this came from CEDU.
Yeah.
You know, it was magnified and exacerbated severely by Afghanistan, but it came from CEDU. So the path I've been on the last 2 years has been a godsend. It has saved my life, given me new purpose. I went from living in a crappy little apartment, having no car, no friends, no interactions, you know, getting my groceries and all my essentials delivered, to I mean, I burned all my social media, got rid of all that, but it's all outrage based, and I'm not much into outrage these days, so I'm good with it. I was a complete and total shut-in with medical problems that were going to put me in my grave within 6 months to a year. And I went out and I turned it around. I made the conscious effort to understand what was going on, what was happening. I fell into psychedelic medicine, and now I'm at the point where I can help other people understand what happened to them. I can put it together coherently through research and experience enough to actualize it and hopefully help somebody else deal with their own experiences or know that they're not alone. And at the same time, I mean, I just got in touch with unsilenced.org a couple of weeks ago after hearing them do a podcast. That's a wonderful organization working to shut down the troubled teen industry nationwide. I mean, there's the Trapped in Treatment project that Paris is doing associated with the podcast. I mean, that's more Provo focused, but they're getting in front of legislators in Utah and elsewhere. There's, I mean, so many different resources out there to get involved and bring attention. And this is, and thank you very much for providing one of them. You know, if my story can help someone else understand something about their own experience, then that's awesome. That's what we're here for.
Exactly, 100%. If you could go back in a time machine and not go through CEDU, would you do it knowing what you know now, and why?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh my God, I would avoid that place like the plague. I would look my parents dead in the eye and knowing what I know now, say, "Are you insane?" I would find some way to share the knowledge that I have now in the in-depth of what it was, and I would have had another 20 years or so of ability to fight against it, to shut it down. Who knows? If I knew what I know now back in 1993, who knows? Maybe we could have got CEDU shut down before 2005.
Yeah, that would have been great.
Yeah. The military, yeah, I would probably do it again, but I would do it better and not get injured. CEDU, no, never, no reason to ever do that again. The fact that a place like that existed is a deep, dark scar on the zeitgeist of the United States of America and its history. And it's our job to make sure it doesn't get swept under the rug in the pursuit of a squeaky, shiny appearance for this country. Because this is the home of troubled teen institutions and institutionalized abuse.
Yep. So, knowing what you know now, is it your belief that these schools should all be shut down, or is it your belief that they should all be fully, really fully regulated? Like, actually, like background checks? Like, do you think that's even possible at this point? Or do you think that they should just be shut down?
In my belief, I would go with the whole burn it all, you know. But like I say, for folks like Delaney and myself who never got the build up, it's easy for us to say this is all just evil and it needs to be shut down. But the question still remains, there are at-risk youth in this country and in this world, and people who need some sort of a place that can address that and help get them back on the right track or prevent self-destruction, self-harm, things like that. I believe those places, if they are to exist, need incredibly strict regulation. They need incredibly well trained and accredited staff, and they require a program designed by medical professionals, executed by medical professionals and behavioral health professionals, not by a cult that was designed to control and manipulate people. I mean, it's the foundations of the troubled teen industry as they are now are what are rotten to the core. And you can't just bring in the regulation now without changing the core tenets and foundations of the troubled teen industry into something that is more accountable and effective. We know too much now about psychology and development and things of that nature to allow for, you know, institutions to proliferate or exist as they do in the form that they do. I don't believe it's possible to regulate them into compliance and into not being based on a purely evil and manipulative foundation that damages the core identity and foundation of the adolescents it treats. I believe it's possible and needed that we do have a system like that, but you got to burn it down and start over at this point. You can't build on top of what exists.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Okay. Anything else that you want to touch on about any of your like your time there afterwards? Anything else you want to touch on?
Well, no, I'm just I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful that unsilenced.org, that Trapped in Treatment, that even um, Breaking Code Silence can get their heads out of their butts and get effective again. We've got so much momentum and movement on this that I'm very hopeful for the future. And I'm also hopeful that we will find more understanding about CPTSD, the effects of troubled teen institutions long term, as well as different ways to heal from them. That's more my concern at this point than anything. And I do believe that as time goes on, as more people speak out, we'll make progress there. And I think you're helping in an incredible way. Jordan, you've done a great thing with this podcast, and I hope that it provides you some answers that you're looking for about your experience. And I also hope that you can use it to do the same for others. And I do hope I've helped you in that mission in some way.
Yeah, this has been a really eye-opening interview, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the admiration. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, you keep it up. I mean, it's great stuff. And there's a lot of people and a lot of programs and a lot of survivors, whether it be CEDU, Elan, whether it be, your program, whether it be any others out there, there's survivors everywhere that need a voice. And I'll be listening, as I'm sure a lot of others will.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And like I tell everybody, if you think of things that you wanted to talk about or anything like that, let me know and we'll do a part 2. Sometimes I just like to do a part 2, maybe to just check back up with you and see how you're doing. You know what I mean?
Hey, I'm available for you whenever you like. I support what you do. I have whatever information I have. And, if you want to do a part 2, if you have more questions, if you want to get us all together, I'm available. I'm retired right now. I'm in the process of moving, but that's not too big of a deal. That'll only take a few days here and there, but you have my contact info. You can reach me anytime. And I mean, there's so many others too, from David Safran to Adam Egget to, unfortunately, Liam Schiff is gone. His documentary's out there, but there's so many different wealth of resources and information. And if you ever want clarification or direction or anything, I'm here. I'm not the CEDU pro, but I am a well-versed pro on it.
That's for sure. Very well articulated too. All right. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us for this interview. If you've watched this far in the video, please make sure you like the video. Leave a comment down below if you're feeling frisky, and then also subscribe to the channel and make sure you get the notification bell to be notified whenever there's a new video and when I go live, which I haven't done in a while, but who knows, it might happen. So never know. Stay tuned, and thank you guys. Everybody, wherever you're at, have a good evening, day, whatever it is where you're at. Bye, y'all.